Motherfuckers about to get hit with so many foul lines. You think I'm a free throw? Figured it was about time for people to eat crow. You about to get outrhymed? How could I be dethroned? I stay on my toes like the repo, a behemoth in sheep clothes. From the east coast to the west, I'm the ethos and I'm the GOAT. Who the best? I don't gotta say a fucking thing, no, cause I'm seasonal. Fuck rap, hustle like an addict with a semi-automatic. Who the hand it, and he ready for anybody to buck back. Gonna catch a vibe, ain't no way in hell we leaving nobody alive. Human suicide, no fuck that. Bobby feeling villainous, he killing us. I'm coming for your man and his lady, and even a baby. I'm feeling like I'm chicka Slim Shady. Man, stop.
Ken Shamrock's WWF debut in 1997 introduced many younger wrestling fans to the world of mixed martial arts. Shamrock's MMA background was brought to the forefront upon his WWF debut, and his in-ring style blended mixed martial arts with professional wrestling fundamentals, making Ken's early WWF matches quite unique. Shamrock's whole gimmick was based around his background, and the WWF would expand on this gimmick by holding matches inside what they called the Lions Den. The Lions Den was the WWF's own take on the UFC's Octagon, and there's a giant misconception that these matches were the WWF trying to do MMA style matches. Anyone who actually watches a Lions Den match would know that this simply wasn't the case. Yes, there's a cage surrounding the competitors and it looks sort of similar to the Octagon, having an open top cage with no ropes, but that's really where the comparisons end. Inside the Lions Den, it was all professional wrestling with maybe an emphasis on submission moves and throws to begin with, but that's it. I don't think the WWF were trying to capitalise on the success of MMA here, but rather they were trying to capitalise on having Ken Shamrock on their roster. Keep in mind that in 1998, professional wrestling was watched way more than MMA, and the UFC hadn't reached the levels of popularity that the company enjoys today. So there was no reason for Vince to try and change the game by having octagon matches every week. Professional wrestling was doing just fine. In saying that, there was the Brawl for All tournament, but it's been pretty much confirmed that that was all set up by Vince Russo so JBL could get legitimately knocked out on live TV. It wasn't the WWF trying to become legitimate by any stretch of the imagination. So today, let's take a look at every Lions Den match that took place in the WWF and let's see how the match came to be. The Lions Den match, named after Shamrock's training school, was introduced through Ken's rivalry with Owen Hart. Owen had turned on Shamrock to join the nation, and so naturally Shamrock and Owen would feud with each other, a feud that went on through the summer of 1998. A match was booked between Ken Shamrock and Owen Hart for the Fully Loaded pay-per-view, and this match would take place in Owen's home turf, the legendary Hart Dungeon. The dungeon, found in the basement of the old Hart family home in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, was where Stu Hart would train, stretch and punish folks from professional wrestling trainees to athletes, the Harts themselves, even common everyday people who thought that the legend of the Hart Dungeon was nothing more than a beat up old man still trying to be tough. Shamrock was walking straight into enemy territory when he stepped inside the Hart Dungeon for this submission match, and with Dan Severn serving as referee, who knows what was going to happen during this one-of-a-kind match. Being a big fan of the Harts growing up, I absolutely loved this match. Getting to see a wrestling bout take place inside the dungeon on a WWF pay-per-view I thought was a great idea, and credit to Owen and Shamrock, they beat the hell out of each other during this encounter. The competitors slammed each other into the walls, and the structure of the dungeon itself was used when possible. Every punch, kick, slam and takedown could be heard, and it really was a fun and different bout. In the end, Shamrock accidentally kicked Severn, and Owen took this opportunity to nail Ken with a dumbbell. Shamrock was out cold, so Owen grabbed Shamrock's hand and began making a tap out motion. Severn thought Ken had given up, and so Owen Hart won the dungeon match. Before leaving the basement, Owen says, "I rule in the dungeon and I did it all by myself." Great stuff. The rivalry wasn't over yet though. Owen Hart issued an open challenge the next night on Raw, a challenge that was accepted by Dan Severn. Ken Shamrock showed up and he attacked Owen, and this led to Severn going after Shamrock. Ken was infuriated backstage afterwards. He wanted to get his hands on Owen for the injustice that was done inside the dungeon. And because Shamrock stepped into Owen Hart's home turf at Fully Loaded, it was decided that Owen should step into Shamrock's home turf, the Lions Den. The first ever Lions Den match was booked for SummerSlam, and it was announced ahead of time that the match would take place inside the Madison Square Garden Theatre. So already there was a little intrigue here, seeing as the Lions Den would not be held inside the arena itself. Before we get there though, the August 17th, 1998 episode of Raw featured a triple threat match: Owen Hart versus Dan Severn versus Ken Shamrock. And Dan Severn stood back as Owen and Shamrock went to war again. When it looked like Shamrock was about to win, Severn applied a dragon sleeper, and the match had to get stopped when Owen and Severn joined forces to destroy the world's most dangerous man. Steve Blackman tried to help Shamrock, but he too felt the wrath of Dan Severn, and it was made clear at the end of the bout that Severn and Hart had joined forces. Dan the Beast Severn was going to train Owen for the Lions Den match. The following week, Severn and Shamrock had their one and only singles match against each other in the World Wrestling Federation, something that, with the right build, could have and maybe should have been a pay-per-view bout. To be honest though, the WWF audience didn't really know what to make of Severn vs Shamrock. It was a match that had a big focus on takedowns for the first few minutes, and the crowd didn't make a whole lot of noise. When the two began performing professional wrestling moves, that's when the audience began cheering. It's to be expected too though. I mean, you buy a ticket for pro wrestling and you expect to see pro wrestling. Owen Hart interfered, and Hart showed us all that he'd been taking his training with Severn very seriously. Steve Blackman ran in for the save, but the damage had been done. SummerSlam was held in Madison Square Garden on August 30th, 1998, though, as mentioned earlier, the Lions Den would take place in the MGS Theatre. It does look very unique, and putting the Lions Den in a different location within Madison Square Garden, I felt was a good idea. It kinda makes it its own separate event within a pay-per-view. Owen Hart enters first, and you can see that the referee and a cameraman were able to stay on top of the cage during the bout, so the only people inside the Lions Den would be Shamrock and Owen Hart. Shamrock gets a great ovation as he steps into the Lions Den. The referee locks the cage and our match gets underway. Immediately, Shamrock uses the cage to his advantage by drilling Owen into a panel, and a fireman's carry follows. Shamrock tries to hyperextend the elbow and Owen counters with a leg lock. When both men get to their feet, Owen rams Shamrock into the cage and a spinebuster gets followed up with some mounted punches between both men. If anyone, for whatever reason, thought this was going to be some sort of MMA contest, then they'd know by now that this wasn't the case, and I don't know why anyone would have even thought that anyway. The sound of the bumps on the mat lead us to believe that the canvas is the exact same as a WWF ring. Shamrock goes on offense, and Owen uses the rules to his advantage by hitting a low blow, and Ken shows us that he'll also make use of the no holds barred rule by choking Owen with his own shirt. Owen Hart's mouth has been busted open at this point. Dan Severn looks on as Shamrock jumps off the side of the cage to perform a jumping sidekick, and this looked pretty good. A hip toss from the world's most dangerous man follows, but Owen answers by whipping Shamrock into the cage. The New York crowd get a Shamrock chant going, but Owen puts a stop to that with an enziguri. Owen then lifts Shamrock while falling backwards, which leads to Ken's face getting slammed into the cage, and things are now not looking too good for Shamrock. What you've probably noticed is that things have slowly turned into a more standard WWF cage match as the bout progresses. Shamrock is able to counter Owen's piledriver and Hurricane Rana attempts, and Ken is able to use the cage once again to his advantage. He tries it one more time, and Owen manages to counter with a power slam. This leads to Owen Hart applying the sharpshooter, which would normally be enough to end a match, but this isn't a normal match. Shamrock climbs up the cage while still locked in the sharpshooter, and Owen ends up taking a tornado DDT. Ken Shamrock has definitely used the cage way more to his advantage. Owen remembers what Dan Severn taught him, and we see the Dragon Sleeper, a move that has been quite important throughout this whole build-up. Again, Shamrock shows that the Lions Den is his turf by walking up a side panel and reversing with his signature ankle lock. Severn is about to throw in the towel, but he walks away instead. Owen Hart has no choice but to tap out, and the first Lions Den match ends with a win for Ken Shamrock. The audience goes nuts during Shamrock's post-match celebration, and remember, this was New York. Anyone who said Shamrock wasn't over as a WWF superstar only need to watch this match to get proved wrong. With this victory, the Owen Hart vs Ken Shamrock rivalry had ended. The first Lions Den match really wasn't bad at all. It's easy for people to write it off as another gimmick match that was trying to emulate UFC, but if you look at it as a worked wrestling match and nothing more, then there isn't a whole lot to complain about. 3 further Lions Den matches took place in the WWF the following year, so let's take a look at them. The first that took place is probably the one that everyone forgets about. It happened on Sunday Night Heat on January 10th, 1999, and this wasn't a pre-pay-per-view Sunday Night Heat or anything like that. No, this was just another regular episode that just so happened to feature a Lions Den match. Owen and Severn ended up having a short rivalry, and the Beast would be officiating this matchup between Owen and Steve Blackman. Severn wanted to get a close look at Blackman beating up Owen after the King of Hearts damaged Severn's neck. Because Sunday Night Heat was a 1-hour show, and because the World Wrestling Federation would try to stuff as much as possible into these shows, you kinda go into this one not expecting too much, but it's still good to see a match of this nature taking place on a lesser show. Blackman starts off strong in this one, and he tries to do a suplex where the cage panel would bounce Owen forward a little, but it doesn't really work. Blackman then forgets the rules and he goes for a pin attempt, and so Owen makes the Lethal Weapon pay with a knee lock. Owen follows up with a belly-to-belly suplex followed by a backbreaker. He then misses an enziguri, and this gives Blackman the chance to apply a Muda lock. Owen does what he does best by turning the tides with a low blow. Owen then goes for a pile driver, but Blackman performs a takedown. This didn't look too good, and it almost looks like Owen performed a sort of snap pile driver, and the fact that Steve Blackman hits Owen with a very hard chop afterwards tells me that this spot maybe didn't go as planned. Blackman then hits a body slam, and he tries to climb the cage to perform a headbutt, and well, this happens. Owen again gets his mouth busted open, but he comes back with a spinning wheel kick. A butterfly suplex gets followed up with some mounted punches, and yeah, this one clearly hasn't been as good as the first Lions Den match back at SummerSlam. A belly-to-belly suplex from Owen Hart isn't enough to put Blackman away. The Lethal Weapon comes back with a flurry of hard-hitting offense, and Owen gets rammed into the cage, but Hart finds an opening and he applies the Dragon Sleeper. Blackman walks up the cage, but Owen transitions into a nice takedown. Owen then applies the sharpshooter. Blackman counters with a sharpshooter of his own, and then Dan Severn jumps in and he attacks Blackman. No one is sure why this is happening, but Severn is assisting Owen Hart. Officials have to hit the Lions Den to break up another Dragon Sleeper, and the match ends in a no contest. I know the WWF had some silly plans for Dan Severn, but even the handling of Severn during this time period was absolutely dreadful. The next Lions Den match lasted all of 7 seconds, and it wasn't due to a quick submission or anything like that. The June 7th episode of WWF Raw has become infamous thanks to Vince McMahon revealing himself as the higher power, and this revelation meant that Vince McMahon was also turning his back on the Union stable, a stable that included Ken Shamrock. After McMahon was revealed as the puppet master of the corporate ministry, Stone Cold Steve Austin was announced as the new WWF CEO. And Austin decided that the Union should be able to choose their respective opponents during this very show. Ken Shamrock wanted Vince McMahon, and Shamrock wanted that match to happen inside the Lions Den. The match took place in the semi-main spot of the show. Vince locked himself inside the cage, and just as Shamrock busted open the door, Jeff Jarrett appeared and Shamrock took a chair shot to the head. Shamrock was knocked out, and even though Vince McMahon applied an ankle lock, the referee called for the bell as Shamrock couldn't continue. Vince McMahon defeated Shamrock in a Lions Den match. Of the 4 Lions Den bouts that occurred in the WWF, this is the one you really don't need to waste your time with. The final Lions Den match took place at SummerSlam 1999, 1 year after the inaugural match. This one took place about a month before Ken Shamrock left the WWF, so the match kinda left with him. Steve Blackman was Shamrock's opponent this time. These two had been feuding on and off throughout the summer, and so the Lions Den was going to be used to end the rivalry. Not just any Lions Den match, but a special weapons Lions Den match. Gonna be honest, Blackman's previous performance inside the Lions Den was nothing special, so let's see how he did here, and also let's see if any more innovation could be squeezed out of this match. A match that in essence was very limiting for the performers inside the cage. Shamrock closes the door behind him as he enters the Lions Den, but Blackman has a surprise. The Lethal Weapon pulls out some nunchucks, and right away Blackman attacks Shamrock. After doing some damage, Blackman throws down his weapon, and this proves to be a mistake. Shamrock's able to apply a knee lock. Ken then takes the nunchucks, but Blackman sweeps Shamrock before choking the world's most dangerous man. Shamrock eventually breaks free, and an arm lock gets applied. The nunchucks get thrown out of the cage, and Shamrock goes to work on Blackman. A series of knee strikes floor the Lethal Weapon, and Ken eventually grabs a kendo stick from the top of the Lions Den. Blackman blocks the impact, and a kick and an eye rake gets delivered to Shamrock. Shamrock gets drilled into the sides of the cage again and again, and Blackman then grabs a pair of Eskrima sticks. Shamrock takes an absolute beating next. The sticks are extremely effective in the hands of Steve Blackman, but Ken's able to do what he does best inside these Lions Den matches when he uses the cage to his advantage. Blackman tries to grab a weapon, but Shamrock hits a suplex. Blackman answers with a DDT, and back and forth action continues as Shamrock nails a power slam. Blackman and Shamrock fail to hit their roundhouse kicks, and Blackman lands an enziguri. Steve then grabs another kendo stick, and again Shamrock takes a beating with the weapon. Blackman goes to work, and Ken gets levelled over and over again. Blackman is now confident that he's won the match. Jim Ross gets confused about the match rules when he says Blackman just has to walk out of the Lions Den to win the match, but the referee is obviously keeping it locked. Ken Shamrock wakes up, and Blackman takes a belly-to-belly suplex. Shamrock then grabs the kendo stick, and our match comes to an end with Shamrock destroying his opponent with the weapon. 2 headshots is enough to knock Blackman out, and the referee calls for the bell. It's another knockout finish. Ken celebrates on top of the Lions Den once again, and that was it, the very last time we'd see the match type in the World Wrestling Federation. This one comes in at second place for me. Nothing was as good as the original Lions Den match at SummerSlam 98, but the addition of weapons here kinda added a new twist to the match. Still, it wasn't enough to top the 1998 match. The closest the WWE ever got to doing another Lions Den match was with the NXT Fight Pit, another match that was built around a former MMA competitor, Matt Riddle. The Fight Pit saw the ring ropes getting removed and a cage replacing them, an elevated stage set above the ring, and yeah, it wasn't bad at all, it was something different. Riddle faced Timothy Thatcher in the first Fight Pit, and the second featured Tommaso Ciampa and Thatcher, and both matches were good, one of the better things to happen in the modern WWE during the pandemic. Thatcher won both matches, and old school wrestling fans who maybe enjoyed the Lions Den matches should check these out. There is a different vibe to the Fight Pit in comparison to the Lions Den, but that isn't a bad thing. It can be argued that the NXT matches were actually better. Anyway, the departure of Ken Shamrock and the introduction of the fight pit years later kinda means we'll never see a traditional Lions Den match again, but you never know. If Shamrock were to come back in some fashion, then it's always possible that the Lions Den would return, but I wouldn't bet on it either. The Lions Den matches were definitely products of their time, and some were better than others, but if you're going to take the time to watch any of these matches that were discussed in this video, I would take a look at the Dungeon match, followed by the first ever Lions Den encounter. I hope you enjoyed this video, thank you so much for watching, and take care.
Bustle like an addict with a semi-automatic, who done had it and he ready for anybody to buck back. Go to catch a vibe, ain't no way in hell we leaving nobody alive, even suicide, no fuck that. Bobby feeling villainous, he killing us. I'm coming for your man and his lady, and even a baby. I'm feeling like I'm Slim Shady,
like Jay-Z, jiggers up with fuckers who didn't write anything, are getting washed like bathing. Young Hova, I know hitters like Yankees, gun toes, the pull triggers like crazy, unloaded, leave you shot up in your rover, your body goes limping, slumps over like A-Rod in a month low, but he just homered. Hold up, I said Rover because now your Rover is red like Red Rover, so you know what I meant. But I roll over my opponents instead, making dog sounds, cause I gotta keep breaking these bars down. I'll go slow for the speds, but when I go like the Doberman said, I still think the roof would go over your head.